Good morning or good afternoon, everybody out there. Welcome to my channel. My name is Margaret Pinard. There we go. You are now on BookTube, and I'm a book reader. I'm a book writer, and so that is what you will find me talking about today. Today, what we are going to be talking about is, well, it's Wednesday, so it's a sort of a wrap up. So I'm talking about a Wednesday wrap of Apocalypse Reads. Okay, so why did I get this idea? Why are we talking about an apocalypse? Well, I don't know about you, but things have seemed awful cataclysmic lately. You might have seen it in our media, in our fiction, in our movies, all these things. And I've definitely had moments where I thought, what the F is going on? I'm leaving this joint. Meaning like society in general, and going off to build a campfire and a hut and hiding from everybody, because people be crazy sometimes. So if I had an apocalypse tribe, and if we were all walking away from greater society, these are the books that I would pack and bring with me. And there's a few. So I did the work of putting them all in with links to Bookshop. 2 of them do not have Bookshop availability because they're old, or I can't remember what the other one is, maybe also old. But I thought I'd pop this on just in case people don't know that I do have a bookshop.org website, shop, online storefront thing. It's an affiliate shop. But I put this at the top of my list, books to carry into the apocalypse. And as you can see, there's 14 there, which means I'll be going over 2 that were unavailable. 16. Yes, we can all do math, even though it's the morning. And that is a preview of some of the books. I think I've talked about most of them before, but I am thirsty apparently. I think I've talked about most of them before in various lists, wrap-ups, etc. They are all nonfiction. And lest you come at me with a no humans need story to survive, I agree with you, but I feel like oral stories would survive in an apocalypse setting. We can always make stories up. But what we have here are tangible, practical, build your own healthy society if we have to start over. So that's what this list is about. And I want to know your thoughts. But first, what did you spend your morning or day, if it's evening for you, doing? And I spent mine plotting, which is great because I'm trying to do edits on a novella, and cleaning, which is also good because my mother, seeing the state of my carpets, was ashamed vicariously for me yesterday. So I'm going through and cleaning and making sure I have, healthy indoor air and all that jazz. So what did you spend your morning or your day or your night or whatever it is you've just come from doing? And then I'll say hi to everybody who showed up, hey RC, and give you some time to write an answer if you feel compelled. JD was establishing that he's on the East Coast. So is Anita. Good afternoon, Anita. Welcome. I put up an Instagram story right before this, and shout out to JD. He may get why it's especially for him. There's a Van Halen track on it, which I don't know. I just saw it came up when I was searching for words. Hey, cool gamer. At least it's not like when Deep Impact and Armageddon dropped in the movies. True, although the slow fracture of society might be more painful than the sudden impact of an asteroid. I don't know. We all have to watch it while it happens, which is pretty painful. Anita says The Last of Us is coming up on HBO, though, JD. Is that another apocalypse show, I'm guessing? Interesting. They're all nonfiction. Pending to watch it, Anita, though. The showrunners' dim-witted comments about gaming deterred me. Oh, interesting. Okay, so the question of the day, JD, to quote Rihanna, work, 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 work. I like it. Hey, I'm sharing it with you guys. Full transparency here. Anita's answer, I spent the day evaluating a client's manuscript and wrestling with interview questions. Yes, 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 yes. Anita sent me an email, which I am reviewing and very excited about. It's a good song. Okay, good. Anyone else, if they're coming in or watching this on the replay, feel free to pop in a comment about what you spent. And I put spend with asterisks because when we're thinking about an apocalypse, you kind of rethink your relationship with time. Every moment can be magical, even if you're working or meaningful or what have you. So, you're spending your time, you're spending your life. So if you need to stop for a moment and consider, oh, maybe I didn't want to do X. Maybe I really wanted to do Y. Maybe I'll put that in my schedule and I'll do that. And then I'll feel better. Just your little reminder there. Stay hydrated and think about how you're spending your life. Hey, Daz. Last of Us is a video game that was huge for the community that they made it into an HBO series coming out soon. Oh, thank you. Thank you for the backstory. Also, hey, good to see you. All right, so I'll leave that up for a second. We're going to dive in. I have 5 categories. So tell me if one is missing, right? The categories are nature, because I feel we're all so divorced. We're really going to need help understanding what is good, what is bad, what can hurt us, what can save us in nature. People, since we're building back up a society from scratch, it's good to know how people work. And there's some really interesting choices for that one. Magic, because it's my channel. And as you can see, I'm a little woo-woo, so we've got to have some of that to help us with our myth making, which sort of coheres society together. Home, which is like nesting and safety and security, and sort of, goes into some other categories. All of these sort of bleed into each other. You'll see as we go through. And food, because also, former foodie, my hands are doing a lot today. Food is very important to keep body and soul together. So as I have culled my collection, I really only have cookbooks and food-related books that I really love, with a few exceptions because I haven't read them. But so we definitely have food books we're taking into the apocalypse. So, oh, cool. Desiree says, I love this topic. Post-apocalyptic stories are my favorite, and recently wrote a short one. That's not the 18th century Scotland one that I was hearing you talk about. A different one. She's got all the writing. Very exciting. All right, let's put this down. Let's talk about nature. So the first category, nature, I've got here. You will not be surprised to note that first one is the book that I recently finished after putting it off for so long, Braiding Sweetgrass, Robin Wall Kimmerer, and it's got lots of tabs. Hopefully this will help me when I'm running from something chasing me in the woods. No, that's not what these books are for. So Braiding Sweetgrass has a lot of gentling relationships with nature. And if you can hear that, that's Bean grappling with his own nature and scratching posts. So he's behind there. So I think this is like really good for a first step into things. Like if you haven't taken an herbalism course, or you haven't sown crops in a garden, or, pruned plants and sort of know what the cycle is, any of those things. And I'm pretty close to that beginner stage. Robin Wall Kimmerer has a really nice way of saying, what about this? Did you know that this is why they do this? And these relationships sort of weave together, and isn't that cool? And maybe that means da-da-da-da-da. So she's just a very gentle voice and a very easy entree into fitting in with your environment instead of trying to conquer it. And that is a big thing for me. So yeah, Braiding Sweetgrass. No points for guessing that one. Everyone knew it was coming. The next one I haven't talked about in a while, but very very surprised that it hit me so much. So, food books. What if you don't get the ingredients you need? True. Like if you're in an apocalypse, where are you going to find spices if you live in Oregon, right? I have books for that. They're not on the list because they're very specific and they'll be tailored to your region. But general principles and stuff like that is what we'll dive into. So you'll see. Yeah, veered off course for a couple days. Historical Scotland still in the outlining stage. All right. Fair, very fair. I said I'd be handling edits, and what I'm doing is like replotting right now. So I get it, and I'm cheering you on. Okay, so the one that hit me harder than I thought is this: Orchard, A Year in England's Eden by Benedict MacDonald and Nicholas Gates. And I believe Ben MacDonald is more the writer, and Nicholas Gates is more the photographer / photographer. So it's got a good sort of section in the middle. And I know I said I was trying to go for general principles rather than super regional. But this would be a good spot to maybe weather the apocalypse if you were near here. I don't think they have a map. I tried to figure out where it was. It's somewhere south of Kent, north of Suffolk, in that area of like southeast England. And basically, it takes you through this preserved orchard that's been there for like 400 years-ish, and talks about what happens in each month and the sort of cycle of insects, birds, plants, all the things that make an orchard up. And so this is regional and specific, but really helpful for demonstrating examples of ecosystems working. And there's a little bit of reflection, not too much. It's pretty much like observation and a little bit of history, which I love. And so especially if you're in England, I would hie thyself here to this little patch and definitely recommend the book. It made things interesting to me that were definitely not before, like the zombie mayfly thing, which I've talked about before. So in terms of, it's not demystifying, but it's like degrossifying. Since we're all going to be much closer to nature in the apocalypse, that will probably be necessary. So, Orchard, number 2. Hey, Maggie. Mama Maggie's got tips for us. She is way ahead of me on the path of like knowing the cycle of animals and plants and all that jazz. So welcome. Looking forward to any tips you have, Maggie. Okay, so speaking of Maggie's environment, which is fantastic. I love to hear about her doing her chores, and she's probably like, oh God, chores. And I'm like, wow, you're actually doing the thing that I want to know how to do. So this is probably a good, like, kind of what she has going. Creating a Forest Garden, Working with Nature to Grow Edible Crops by Martin Crawford. And this is a big, hefty book. And there's lots of pictures. And this is somewhat adaptable because they've got like growing zones and stuff. But it's telling you about the different levels, like how you make up an orchard. So if you don't have 400 years for it to develop naturally, how do you cultivate your own forest garden to take care of itself? Sorry, now he's off the cat scratch post and he's on top and he's like freaking out for some reason. How do you make your own forest garden that is going to be self-sustaining, that is going to be regenerative, that is not going to require a lot of outside input since we don't get fertilizer anymore, and things like that. So again, aspirational goal. My mom has sort of done this. So if you went to our house in San Luis Obispo, the backyard, she's had to cull some of it, but there is a lot of food-bearing plants. There are a lot. And it starts at ground level and it goes to raised bed level and it goes to small tree level / bush and it goes to tall tree level. Now we've had issues with pests and whatever, and you don't have it all nailed down, but the idea that you can have things at different times of the year that sustain you, and have things that you can dry or make into preserves or preserve in some other way is super encouraging. So if you're going to try to be positive in the apocalyptic future, you definitely want to start a forest garden. And a food forest is like another way people call it if you're going to be like searching terms and stuff. But yeah, so I'm hoping to sort of learn how to be a steward to that at some point. And some of the traveling down to California has been about that, and trying to learn what happens when you prune, like stuff like that. And it's not in there yet. So this is why I'm clinging to this type of book, and we'll be taking it with me into the apocalypse. Okay, we're still in nature. It's a soothing looking, if hefty book. Yes. Lots of photographs. Maggie says, start your seeds between Valentine's and March 1st so you can put them in the ground after Mother's Day. Oh, so she's talking about starting seeds indoors, doing little plants, starts, and planting them in the ground after Mother's Day in May. Depends on where you are. But yes. Hello, Melissa. Hello. Surrounding your garden with marigold rose help keep the bad insects away. Yes, I'd heard of this too. I remember growing up with a book that my parents had, Tomatoes Love. No, I can't remember it. But it was like plant pairings that go well together and sort of help each other. And it's kind of the same idea as the Three Sisters in a lot of Native American traditions, which is that you have 3 plants in a cycle that will, Robin Wall Kimmerer talks about this. You have the 3 sisters, beans, corn, tomato, corn. Let's see, think of the levels here. Corn is the tallest. Beans are the bush. And what's going to be down on the ground? I can't think of it right now, but that's why I'm carrying these books with me, because my brain's going to be fried then as well. Yes. And I have those, but I didn't choose one because I was trying not to be specific. I already cheated once with the orchard book because I love it so much. Squash. Thank you. Squash is the one on the ground. Right. And so they all sort of help each other through different periods of their growth and like nitrogen fixing and all that kind of stuff. So yeah, there was a tomato book that was about pairings that had a similar vein. But anyway, what else do I have for nature? And shout out recommendations you have for nature books, specific ones, besides local edible plants. I have a Druid's Guide to Plants. I've got a Scottish Guide to Plants because that was a research book from my trilogy. I've got a Pacific Northwest. So yeah, and my sister got me edible wild plants for Christmas, which I just started. So that's very exciting. I have a couple that I had on audio. Let's see. Nature. Nope. Okay. So it looks like 3. I thought we had 4. We have 3 for nature. What's next? People. Uh-oh. Uh-oh is right. Okay. Oh, I know what will bridge the gap because it's both. One of my favorite books of like the last 5 years, the entire time I've been on BookTube, is All We Can Save: Truth, Courage, and Solutions for the Climate Crisis, edited by Ayanna Elizabeth Johnson and Catherine K. Wilkinson. And Ayanna Elizabeth Johnson is the one who also edited Best Science and Nature Writing for 2022, which I also just finished, bought entirely on the strength of her name as editor. And I loved it. Wide-ranging, very accessible, very compelling, and similar feel, right? So she went for, I should say, articles that highlight people's actual successes. So instead of being like a doom scrolling, all these things are wrong, all these things are pushing us off a cliff, All We Can Save is about all the people and organizations and families and communities and like small micro efforts that are actually doing good in their community and helping. So I figured this would be a good manual for how to get together with your neighbors and get together with the people in your apocalypse group and, figure out how to not reclaim, what's the word I'm looking for? Clean up and reverse the damage that's been done wherever you end up in the apocalypse. These are the things I read before. I might pop up the video where I talk about it if I remember. And, lots of corners turned down on the top, which is good. There's only like 2 on the bottom, which is like my having an issue with something. So cannot recommend this book enough for people who want hopeful stories for how we're not going to go off a cliff and how we can change things and how people are doing it and how they're being funny and vulnerable. There's poems in here. There's essays. Is there fiction? Maybe not. I can't. There's definitely creative expressions of the struggle for reclaiming the planet. And so that's why I really appreciate this book and would carry it with me. So there you go. There's the nature / people. So I thought that would fit in both. And now we're going to go into people. Squash or pumpkin or zucchini are good to have in arid areas because the broad leaves help save the water in the soil. Yes. Yeah, that's one of the things I remember is that it shades. And when you shade, you have lower temperature. When you have lower temperature, you have less evaporation. When you have less evaporation, more of the water stays in the soil. To all the saves. Got a jet. Work me beckoning. Thanks for stopping in, JD. Appreciate it. All right. You know what else I recently learned from the Science and Nature book was a thing about beavers. I don't know anything about beavers, but it came up in the book and I started talking about it with my parents. Currently, most laws in the US and in Canada, I believe, about beavers are mainly to say don't pick up a beaver and transport it somewhere else and let it go, because that's taking something that's a pest to you and putting it on your neighbor's property. And fine, that sort of makes sense, except that it leads to the only solution being like extermination. You're gonna kill beavers on your property because they're being destructive. What people are discovering, especially on the West Coast in Vancouver, Washington, Oregon, in this article, was that when you introduce beavers to certain places that are arid, as Maggie's talking about here, they actually, when they make dams, they save the water in one place, it drains better, you get wetlands again where there weren't any, and your drainage and your water cycle completely changes. So one beaver, start small. And yeah, crazy, right? Like when you start understanding, oh, this is one little link and there's a big long chain, and it's not a chain, it's like a whole quilt. That's not a good metaphor, but someone who sews might tell me, like, it's not a chain, it's an Afghan. There we go, because that works with like little beads. That works. Ooh, Maggie's got a suggestion. A basic tools and simple machines book like Back to Basics or Old Time Farm and Garden Devices and How to Make Them are great books to have. Ooh, tools. See, I haven't even gotten into tools. Garden devices and how to make them. That's really cool. Robin Wall Kimmerer, which is top of mind because it's only a few books ago, talks about making shelters and also making a certain type of basket that's very well known in Eastern Canada. And not just like how you weave it into the basket, but also how you select the tree, how you strip the bark, and how you get it so thin that it's pliable. And so she really gives you a view of like the craft and what people have to learn to be able to do it. And that's really cool. And that's a device and how to make it. So yeah. Retention. Thank you. Water retention areas. And places that are, one of the things that like jumped out and prompted the person to do the research was that the areas that had beavers were the ones that did not go up in flames in Northern California, I believe, in one of her examples. And so it was like, I wonder if there's a correlation because there's water there and the trees weren't like dry kindling ready to go up. So yeah, really interesting. Okay, back to people. So let's see. People. This is like one of the first books I think I put on BookTube. It's Dark Age America by John Michael Greer. I am unsure how to think about him. He's got a lot of apocalyptic subject books. I also read his Green Wizardry, maybe similar topic. Anyway, so he has one that's more about nature, but this is more about societal collapse and like what people start doing to one another and how to recognize the signs, and like we're already too far down the road. So if you don't know how to farm and you don't own land, like what are you gonna do? But I mean, it's not funny. It's funny to talk about, but climate change, cultural collapse, and the hard future ahead. It's really good to like give you some things to think about, questions to think about. If you're going to be starting a society from scratch, what is important to be on the same page about? What is important to have skills wise? What is like your survival instinct? We're so far divorced from any of that. Like, I find something like that pretty refreshing because I don't know anything about it. And, you know, hopefully it's got wheels turning and gears in motion. And again, taking it with me because I don't know all the things. So that was a really interesting read, and I couldn't give it up. I resell a lot of my books, but I kept both of his because I think, it's one of those differing opinions, some of the same values, but some not, and useful to consider at different points in my life. So still have that. People. So this is the first one that's not available on Bookshop, but I found it really interesting. It's The Social Thought of Jane Addams, which I just finished in December, edited by Christopher Lash. And as you can tell, it's a rather old edition. I think it's from the 60s. I'd been looking for the second 20 years of Hull House for a long time, and apparently it's not worth reading. So the first one's really good. Some of the writing from the first 20 years at Hull House is in here, as well as other writings later. If you don't know, Jane Addams was a social activist / philanthropist, although she wouldn't have called herself a philanthropist, / sociologist in Chicago in the late 19th, early 20th century. I think she died just after World War I or during World War I, advocating for peace. So she had very, I would say, religion influenced, but not decreed values about compassion and independence and really good things. And then was action oriented enough to go into the Chicago slums of that area and look at what was happening with immigrant neighborhoods and labor violations and just people taking advantage of one another, and figure out small things she could do as a well-to-do white lady with her friends, and classes she could start, and relationships she could forge. And in here, her essays really get at like why people turn one way or another, right? So when she was investigating sociological things in like 1900, say, it was, why does someone choose to work these amount of hours and leave the child at home? There's a rationale behind it. We need to understand that before we can try to say you're bad for leaving your child at home exposed to all these dangers. And so, yeah, gal after my own heart, get to the actual root of the issue rather than casting judgment and alienating a group of people that don't have many choices. So I found this really thought-provoking. Unfortunately, again, out of print, hard to find. You might be able to find it on a used book site. But The Social Thought of Jane Addams, yeah, I don't know if I'm going to put it in a book or incorporate it, but I just thought this was really good. And maybe not needed at the beginning of the apocalypse group because we'll be small, but when we build up, when we have people join us, when we have multiple sort of backgrounds that are trying to get on the same page, like this might be part of the curriculum. Like I would really appreciate people to appreciate this. So yeah. And if you can't find it, I don't know, come and do a book club or borrow it from me. All right, so it's people, still on people. Richard is here. Hello, good evening, Richard. Jim is here. Good evening, Jim. Ahoy, ahoy. This book looks treasonous. Social thought. I don't know about that one. Maggie says, I always worry about those who don't realize that a cow or goat can produce their weight in milk, protein over time and repeatedly, but over time, repeatedly starving irrational people will only see barbecue and kill them. Oh, and starving but irrational people will only see its possibility as barbecue and kill the cow or the goat. Yeah. Yeah. There and okay, side thing. If anyone I'll leave the comment up while I'm on my tangent. There's a young woman on TikTok who does, I think she's called Western Water Girl, and she does talks about the Colorado River Basin. So Maggie, right up your alley. I don't know if you've heard of her, but she talks about the why did I link this? Because the main water consumers that aren't being forced to reduce consumption are ag, especially fodder for cows and cattle ranchers in California, and like the not Central. What's the other one called? Not Pioneer, not Power. Eastern California, Southern. Anyway, yeah, and it's just one of those things. Like, do the math, or just idealistically think, maybe if I had a little less meat in my diet, the world wouldn't be such a crap fest. Can I do that? Do I have access to other proteins? Yes, I can. So maybe this is a thing. Richard was talking about, tangent over, talking about the Dark Age America one. I don't think it's treasonous. It's reading the writing on the wall and sort of like figuring out why people are like this. One upside of the apocalypse would be a world without TikTok. No, Richard. If you haven't tried it, don't knock it. Hi, Justiva. Welcome to the conversation. I'm about halfway through. We're about halfway through the hour. Let me keep going. So more people books for the apocalypse. Now, this may seem like a strange choice and something that wouldn't apply to people who aren't in love with Scotland. The Crofter and the Laird by John McPhee. It's also old. It's another like 1960s, but it is available in Bookshop. So I listed all the books and their links in the description, so feel free to check those out. The reason why I consider this a really good book, because it also talks about social dynamics. If you're not familiar, a crofter is someone who is on a small subsistence farm. They're often on the coastal areas, because the UK is an island. And the laird, if you're an Outlander fan, it's just a Scottish word for lord. So it's basically the small farmer and the lord. It's talking about the class relations or the social relations between people who own the land and people who work the land. Put your class hats on, everybody. So it's about like people who live on an island, because he goes to Colonsay, which is a tiny island, and uses it as his sort of microcosm. He lives there for several years. He talks to people. He gets their trust. He sort of learns what it is people value and how they make their decisions and why they perceive people a certain way. And again, social relations and how you work together or disagree and misunderstand each other and have issues. And if you've been around his channel for a while, I read The Soap Man, which is about Lord Leverhulme and the Scottish Island affair, and how that was super interesting because he thought he was doing a good thing for the people, and the people were like, "What are you doing? You don't even know us." So, like, understanding what people value and not taking away their independence and dignity and that sort of thing, very important. So again, with social thought, I would think an important old but really rings true social primer for the apocalypse. Okay, making our way through. Okay, now we're getting funny here. Let's see. America doesn't really acknowledge treason, does it? Not since the Cold War and those spies were executed. In my brain, that's where I stick. You're good, Margaret. I came in right at the end of that one. I was being facetious. UK is an island. Are you an island boy, Richard? Can confirm. It's an island. Great Britain is the biggest island in Europe. Island Boys. I don't know that song. Ninth biggest island in the world. Arguably the best island in the world. Sorry, JD. JD's out. He will not take that lying down, I think. Maggie says soybean and corn crops use a lot more water than cows in the West. Oh, I almost had the name of the valley. Dang it. But people want to wash their cars, swim in their pools, have nice yards. Average pool holds a year's worth of water. House. Yeah, it's interesting. Her account goes through the totals of things. Like you might think almonds, you might think, all these things that are high water inputs for crops. It's still less than the cows in this specific valley out of the allotment of the water in the river basin. So, yeah. We are too dry to grow those crops without irrigation, but it's easier to blame cows and farmers. And then Jim's breaking up. Nestle sucks up a lot of water. Yeah, it depends on where you are in the world, right? I don't know if they do. What is the flippin' valley called? This is going to annoy me. Someone's going to have to help me out here. Yeah, livestock that's here to feed the humans is what is speeding up the climate stuff. That and oil. Yeah. Yeah. It's hard to compare sometimes. Like everything is awful, but that's why I'm bringing you books to like give you hope. Okay. So the next people one, the next one I have that's in person is The Old Ways, A Journey on Foot by Robert Macfarlane. Robert Macfarlane, one of my favorite authors. He kind of has a style like a travel writer, but then gets into nonfiction research that he needs to tell the story of the place that he is going. So he also wrote Underland, which I've reviewed, but I think this I read way before I had a channel. So The Old Ways is his journey to several places around the world, tracing pathways that used to be like migration patterns or would you stop? Hey. Okay. He had to do this to like get his eyes back to like regular pupil dilation. Nope. He's still wigging out. Okay. He goes to these places where there used to be clear paths because people needed to go from water to summer, what do they call it? Summer to winter, basically, residents or trade routes or what they call coffin paths, where people would go to the nearest church to have burial and they'd carry the coffin of whoever had died in the community over the hills. Really interesting because he talks about the relationship between humans and the landscape and like our effect and does it last. And since we're having such an effect on the landscape, it's interesting to look at like the long ago effect we used to have and how the environment has recovered or adapted. And so I really liked it. Let's see. Most of the places in here are on the island of Britain. But he does do sort of like a side swipe to the Middle East, which I think is a little strange, but sets off from his Cambridge home to follow the ancient tracks, holloways, drove roads, and sea paths that form part of a vast network of routes that crisscross the British landscape. Palestine, Spain, and the Himalayas. Wanderers, pilgrims, guides, and artists. So if you are in an apocalypse found family that is wandering the land looking for a place to settle, and you pick up hints. What does this mean? What does that mean? Where do I find water? He just has a really interesting way of informing and talking about his own reaction to the landscape. So this is one of my favorite books that I would bring with me. Maybe not as useful, but more of a sentimental choice. People and landscape. Yeah, I don't think pools are really the thing, although they are a visible sign of what feels like wasteful living. Corn in Illinois is to feed livestock. There was somewhere around 2.5 billion people on Earth when my mother was born. She just turned 78 now. Yeah, lots of people. Also, the apocalypse would be a world without paper straws. Apocalypse book to bring us hope. You can have macaroni straws. You have to have flour and water to make the straw. Oh, diapers, clothing, and books fill landfills faster than straws or books. River Valley is skewing the information to be inflammatory. That the majority of New Mexico, Colorado, Wyoming, and Montana don't have that luxury of water being a single river valley. I didn't mean to say river valley. I'm talking about the watershed. So all the people who are governed by the Colorado River Pact of like 1920 or something like that, which hasn't been updated and still counts on imaginary water that someone measured at one point being the real amount and is no longer the real amount of actual rainfall and water stock. So that's the beginning of the problem. K-pods have become their own tracked landfill item. K-pods, 4 per person per house per day is the average usage. Is that the coffee one-use thing? 0 here. Yeah, 0 here. I'm not sure what it is. My sister has one, I think, if that's what it is. Most use is probably office and hotels. The Mister's office has a pod machine, so he takes them there. We got rid of ours. Too costly. In more ways than one. Invisible costs. Okay, so I've got some overlays here that are about people. So here we have a fan favorite, or like a favorite of the last year, The Purpose of Power, How We Come Together When We Fall Apart by Alicia Garza. And this is the person who I was surprised when I was reading it, because she grew up in California and is one of the activists that started Black Lives Matter. And her story in so many like random ways sort of mirrors mine at the first 20-ish years of life. And I just was like, oh, wow, she's made different choices at those key points and like gone to a very different place, but is doing immensely important work. So as the book's title suggests, Coming Together When We Fall Apart, perfect apocalypse read for she starts out with like a couple nonprofits she worked with to try to stop development of a place that was toxic, but for low-cost housing, available for low-cost housing, and it was going to be remade into, of course, high-price condos. And so there was a lot of things to pick apart and a really interesting community organizing lens that she brings from that experience into her future work. So I thought that was really great. I've been to trainings and stuff where we talk about stakeholder engagement and we talk about hearing from all sides of an issue, and that approach for sure. But just like in the other books about people where there's like misunderstandings and there are rational actors that don't appear to be rational, but you have to figure out what they're basing their decisions on, and you have to have trust to have people open up to you. And so that is sort of at the core of her work. And Purpose of Power, the title is telling you that I feel like it's telling us that let's see. The reason you do all this work, community organizing, getting to know people, being on the ground, knocking on doors, getting to know an issue, pinning down the facts, is that once you have that knowledge under your belt and you have those people who trust you, you have power and you can make your life better. And so apocalypse lesson number 502, right? That is what I would hope that my little found family in the apocalypse would be capable of doing. So perfect manual for that. K-cup pods. They're plastic, metal, and paper. Keurig. Thank you, Melissa. That's the word I was looking for. the brand name of a specific type of coffee maker that uses single-use, throwaway pods with coffee grounds in them is Keurig. So that's what we're talking about. Have to catch this on replay. I'm probably going to go over an hour, so you can stay for this portion if you want, Ben. Welcome. So I really loved this book, and in the people category. The other one in the people category, I think this is the last one, number 6, is Together by Vivek Murthy. He was the 19th Surgeon General of the United States. And Together, subtitle, The Healing Power of Human Connection in a Sometimes Lonely World, is his time. He does a little bit of like memoir growing up stuff, but then the bulk of the book, and I listened to it so I can remember like where I was when I was listening to it. And funnily enough, I was in the backyard in San Luis Obispo weeding because we have an oxalis harvest, I will say, a year and a half ago. And there are certain points of this that made me tear up, because human connection in a lonely world is going to be the theme of the social experiment after, we fall down and have to get back up. So basically, he talks about his background, how he got to be Surgeon General a little bit, and then goes into what did he want to do to make his mark as Surgeon General, right? You have sort of a policy platform. You have a bully pulpit, as some might call it. And what did he want to push especially for in the American medical landscape? Lots of choices. But, and I think this was during Obama era. He sort of drilled down through several other issues to see that there was a disconnection, a loneliness that was creating other problems. So instead of addressing the symptoms, say the opioid epidemic, which is driven by poverty, despair, lack of access, things like that. Like, what is the actual personal individual issue? And so he does a lot of research talking about brain chemistry and talking about loneliness. And then also kind of like All We Can Save, he goes into people who are doing like little pieces of the puzzle to help bring people back together. And so that was lovely. Book for Hope in the Apocalypse, Together by Vivek Murthy, MD. Highly recommend for a, I wouldn't say heavy, but I would definitely say emotionally live wire type of read. So, there's lots of, I won't say there's lots of easy reading. It's his, I listen to his voice, right? So his voice is very gentle, very calm, very measured. And that helps deliver the message that like, there's so much despair in our world and how can we address it? And it's not all doom. Again, it's a hopeful book. It just makes you realize maybe how much you're missing and how much more you could be having in your life if you reached out, if you connected with people, which is always a good reminder. Let's see. Melissa says, I'm trying to think what I could possibly offer as part of your apocalypse family. I know. I am like failing on most accounts as well. I'm trying to do this, I'm trying to do that, and like not very good at anything, but we're working on it. So hopefully, in a few more years, I'll have like enough core expertise. But I get it, Melissa. Jim says, Pringle cartons are also tricky for recycling because of mix of materials. Yes, talking about recycling. Any need for sarcastic comments? I don't know. A lot of BookTube friends would be in on that one. Yeah, totally. Humor makes everything easier. Yes. We had a big writer person, Robert McKee, writing craft expert extraordinaire on the Thoughtful Bro on A Mighty Blaze yesterday. And someone was talking about one of his anecdotes about Germans not being able to take a joke and taking it in a serious way. And I think that the point of being able to laugh is, for Americans especially, is that we can't talk about a lot of things. And so instead of talking about them directly, we make a joke about it, and laughter sort of breaks the ice, and the nervous laughter eventually will morph into like comfort and trust and all that kind of stuff. But that was an interesting point to raise, because it made me think about why do we always crack a joke, and maybe we do need sarcastic writers. So Melissa, be ready. Jen Writes Romance is here. Hello. And yeah, really good book. So I recommend. I think that's it for people. The next one I have is Magic. And again, they kind of flow across categories, and I'm going to have to speed this up a little. So let's do the next overlay, since I'm in the overlay section here. I'm going to put this under Magic because it's a book about people and the history of clutter. Clutter, a History, an Untidy History by Jennifer Howard. And she's lovely. I've become a friend with her over on Twitter. And nervous laughter. Don't stare into my soul. It's all good. It's all good. We're all together. So Jennifer Howard, the thing that struck me the most, because of my own history and background, is the midden research that she did, or combed over from other people's actual archaeological midden heap research. And if you don't know what that is, in anthropology, a midden is usually the word that people would use for medieval or very old trash heaps. So you would go through this and you would find like animal bones or whatever was in their diet. So you would make assumptions about their way of life based on what was in their trash heap, basically. And in this one, I remember mostly the Victorian ones, where you would go back in someone's garden, dig it up, and find all this like glass and pottery shards. And some of it was like really high class stuff from centuries earlier. So it was really interesting what the Victorians threw away. But anyway, that's midden research, and not exactly about clutter. She opens with a really interesting story about, I think, her own family and also others in general who are hoarders. And so that starts us off on the clutter train. And why is this book for the apocalypse, you're saying? Because I think it's going to be very useful, talking about Ungrossify with the Orchard book, very useful to go through trash. So and again, we're going to have to get used to different things, right? So cleanliness standards or hygiene equipment, whatever you need to change or adapt to be able to comb through the excesses of our profligate society currently, right? So if you come here to my house, you will notice that there are lots of things that are old. That card, that inspiration card that my mom sent, probably over a decade old, been through several moves with me. This thing about chaos, this like inspiration calendar card, again, calendar is years old, using it as art, reusing things. What else is around me that I can point to? Like, oh, the stack that I've hidden of video cassettes, because I don't know why I have video cassettes, actually, because they still continue to give pleasure, and I still have access because I have a built-in VCR in this TV that I've covered up as well. So part of my personality, when people say like, oh, this is my personality now, is really wanting to get all the use out of an object. Sometimes that can lead to clutter and hoarding, which is bad because it's an obsessive hobby thing. But sometimes it can lead to, sorry, I'm losing my words. Let me take a drink. It can lead to upcycling and good outcomes. Oh my gosh. Melissa introducing a lovely point here. As a naturalist, I only knew the term because of squirrel mittens. I didn't know humans had mittens. That's hilarious. Yeah, I think it's mainly like Viking and sort of medieval era research into human settlements, but I did not know squirrels had mittens. That's adorable. And then Maggie says there was an entire section of a class I took for my anthropology degree where we talked about middens going back to 3500 BC. Fascinating, right? Yes. I didn't know Canada had this too, but Melissa gets the joke. The more you know. So, Orchard was a good book to degrossify insects if we have that hang up from modern society. And Clutter might be a good book to destigmatize going through trash and using things in a different way than they were meant for, and probably past their natural life, because we have such a different view of natural life of objects and material history stuff. So super fascinating. Definitely recommend as an interesting read, but also I'm taking it with me into the apocalypse. Ancient Egyptians had some weird trash. Interesting. Good to know. Do magpies have middens? That would be an interesting one too. Melissa, can you tell us, or is that too far out? We may have to wait for Beth Ann to watch this because it's like closer to bees, the birds that collect all this stuff. So do crows and rats. Wow. And now I have to look at Egyptians. See, this is why it's going a little long, because I'm getting distracted by all your brilliant comments. Okay. So that's magic number 1. The other magic I have is, actually I have 2 more magic books. So there's one that's called The Magical Year. Oh, let me put this down here. Close that up. The Magical Year by Danu Forrest. And if you can't tell, it's a woo-woo book. And I've taken lots of notes because, and I think I've gone over this a little bit before, I was really interested in the pagan sort of wheel of the year rituals as a way to ground myself in nature and notice the passing of time and notice the moon waxing and waning and noticing when plants were coming into flower, etc. And this is kind of like Orchard, but for the greater world. It's more general, and it's more about reflection at certain times of the year, and myth. So speaking of magic, if we're going to be a found family after the apocalypse, we're going to be making our own myths. But here are some really old ones to pick and choose from. So I really liked that aspect. If you have no idea what I'm talking about, let me show you. So, for example, one of the holidays that was celebrated in the Wheel of the Year is Bealtaine or Beltane. And I don't know, maybe Richard, if he's still up, recognizes this. It's called, let's see if I can get it backwards, the Obios or the Hobby Horse. And it's a weird sort of thing you would do in a parade, right? But it's reenacting something that was important to a society from like 800 years ago. And so we can decide, we can make our own myths. What is important to us? What would be beneficial to enact or have as a ritual? And I think that's useful. I've sort of abandoned the like leading people in groups and sort of talking about that in moon circles and whatnot because of friends coming and going. But it's still really interesting to me. It still feels like it fills a need in any sort of group that wants to cohere. So Danu Forrest, Magical Year, marking the 8 celebrations throughout the year and sort of getting more in touch with nature and changing of the seasons and being on planet Earth. So that was really fun. And I love a lot of the stuff in there. All right. Anthropology suits you, Maggie. Yes. Oh, Maggie has found a link. Egyptian garbage dump. Excellent. Rings a bell talking about the Hobby Horse. Yeah. Beltane Fire were a prog rock band. Did not know. Anita says the new mythology of Stranger Things. I don't know. Do they have their own new mythology? I haven't tuned in. And Melissa says, Jim, in the nature world, I've only heard middens used for rodents, squirrels, rats, chipmunks, etc. Interesting. Well, humans are now in the rat family. Are you surprised? No, you are not. As I've been telling my mom, okay, we're definitely going to go over. Sorry if anyone has to leave and go to a new thing. I understand. I'll maybe see you back in the comments after. But when my mom would say something that I knew like was just her all over again, I've been going like this. This is my surprised face because I'm totally not surprised by anything that she's doing. Okay, last one for magic, and magic is going to lead us into home. So this is both categories. This is a book I read a long, long time ago. It's got a 1998 receipt, but that's not mine because I actually also have the order. Look at that. It's all faded, but that's the old Amazon order thing from 2010. So 2023, 13 years ago. But it still has made an impression. Obviously, I can't remember details. I haven't reread it since then, but it was so interesting. The Power of Place by Winifred Gallagher. And Winifred Gallagher has written a couple books that I've picked up and loved. Most, like the one I haven't read from her is How the Post Office Changed America. Not a favorite with the book club, so I didn't get to read it for Patreon book club last year. But anyway, The Power of Place, How Our Surroundings Shape Our Thoughts, Emotions, and Actions. So you can see why it would appear in the category of home. But why magic? Well, because isn't brain chemistry a type of magic? And, you know, if you're a scientist, you may think, no, that's a little horseshit. But hear me out. In the apocalypse times, when we're wandering strange lands, when we're noticing the signs in nature, when we're trying to figure out where to settle and who's going to do what, and whether something is going to be an auspicious place, this is going to be helpful. So I think most people would agree that humans are affected by place, right? Whether it's noise, whether it's light, whether it's smells that are present in a place, whether it's tight space, whether it's a cluttered feeling. There's lots of things in our environment that can affect whether we feel happy or sad, anxious or cared for. And I just remember being like, oh, and just flipping through, like she has lots of examples throughout history. Obviously straight way to my heart when you're using historical examples. And also science. And she's kind of like Robert McFarlane, like the same place of a really compelling writer taking bits of science and history and their own experience and like making it accessible. So yeah, Winifred Gallagher, definitely highly recommend for a little bit of magic and a little bit of home, since we're trying to create a home in the post-apocalyptic landscape. Okay. Home. Okay. The next home book crosses over into food category, and we're on the last category, so we're rounding the corner here. This actually, Desiree is no longer here because I don't see her in the comments, I think, but this would be a really valuable book for her. The Garden Cottage Diaries, My Year in the 18th Century by Fiona J. Houston. I'll say Houston because I think that's how they pronounce it in the UK. So if you've ever seen a TV show where they pretend to go back in history, like 1900 House or, you know, Civil War, whatever, when people do a social experiment, like a reality show, to live the way people lived in a different time period, this is what she did to herself. So again, kudos for the self-discipline. If you don't know, if you don't know this about me, I had a formative young experience, which was that my parents took us on living vacations. I don't know what you would call them. But when I was 8, we went on a wagon train. So we took a week-long vacation. That was torture for both my older sisters who were teenagers and not into being pioneers on the prairie of South Dakota, let me tell you. But this sort of experiential learning, I think, is really valuable. And she basically has a journal that she keeps every day about what she's doing to live as if someone was in the 18th century. So she's got different sections. One of them is like energy, one is leisure, one is food. Because she talks about how she makes the candles that she uses to see. And she talks about how she walks to the market where she can get foods that would have been available in the 18th century. And how she gets tired because she's doing all this like manual labor. And, you know, when she plants something and when she mills something and like really doing all the work. And then she also has like recipes. And there's lots of gorgeous photographs and they're just for fun. Also for like reference for growing things. But that's not really the focus. Oh, this is where I learned about using oak galls to make ink. How cool is that? So yeah, basic basic facets of life in the 18th century, how you had to do all that to be self-sufficient, how it worked for her as an experiment. I think she did it for a year in the 18th century. Holy cow. So if you're wondering where you're going to get your willpower, read the diaries of Fiona Houston. I found it very entertaining, very humorous, very honest and open, and very interesting to think. And it was better than watching a reality show where like it's all about drama. So there you go. And again, Desiree may want to find this. I may recommend it to her in a message later. For home and food, which leaves us 2 more for food, and then we're done. Oh, the other note. I pointed out. Oh, Desiree is here. Oh, cool. Let me catch up here. Best friend is texting because she's getting married this year. Looking it up since you didn't have a link for it. Is this one that's not available? I put little X's next to the 2 that were not available, and this may be the other one. It might be a UK published book, so it might be harder to find in the US. But yeah, that could be like a gold mine for your historical book. Let's see. Jim, freshwater shell maidens provide valuable information about past Aboriginal economy and land use. Yes, again, that's like the archaeology/anthropology research. And rats are wonderful animals, and I take that as a compliment. They're probably cleaner than humans. I've heard it said. Okay, so the last 2 books for food. We've got food. What was I going to say? Like half of these books on Bookshop are back ordered. But let me tell you, don't let that scare you off. It's just like pre-ordering. If you order it, it will come eventually. And the time is going to pass anyway. So we have a few years before societal collapse. So why not order the book now? I don't know. Paper shortage, costs, whatever. It'll eventually get there. That is my hope. That is my hope for you. Okay, so last 2 books. Laurie Colwin, Home Cooking, A Writer in the Kitchen. I don't really like the cover, but let's see. Let's see through my archaeological midden here. Anyone want to guess what year I read this? I got it from Borders, which no longer exists, so that's one clue. Yeah. And I've got one of the other books still here as well. So A Writer in the Kitchen, she's a very funny writer, right? So I don't have fiction here, like I said, but I have recipes and chocolate. She's got a whole chapter on chocolate, which we won't have in the apocalypse, but that's fine. We have other substitutes. Maybe. Potato salad, we definitely have potatoes. How to fry chicken, we definitely will have chickens. And here's the title essay that is one of her other books titles, Alone in the Kitchen with an Eggplant. So, ungrossifying insects, unstigmatizing trash. This will help us come to terms with our relationship with food. There are a lot of other books I have that I could have chosen for a relationship with food, but these 2 especially, and the 18th century book, are helpful in terms of why do we like something? Why do we not like something? And what do we do with it? Like, what is our general overview of what we can handle? I read this a long time ago. I bought it in 2010. I've read the sequel. I have the sequel on my shelf too. She's really funny. And I don't know, I just felt like we needed a more humorous book. So recommend. It's on the Bookshop links. 1704 Scotland need all the historical research ideas. Hey, you are in Florida. Maybe I could post it to you if you want to borrow the book, if it's hard to find. Okay, so penultimate book. Let's get to our last book here since we're over. And this is one you've seen before. So An Everlasting Meal, Cooking with Economy and Grace by Tamar Adler. This is not a cookbook. It does have recipes, sort of very loose recipes, but it's more about the same thing, the approach to cooking and your relationship with your food. And not, okay, the other books that I was talking about, relationship with food, I was talking more about psychological, how do I separate this? I have a book called Women, Food, and God. And there are some really mind-blowing things that I pulled away from that book, which are things like women will eat food in order to tamp down the spiritual or sort of higher creative urges because they're not being met. I was like, oh, interesting. I think we have a lot of pathologies around food in American culture. So there's that whole genre. But this is not that. This is more about valuing food for what it is, right? So if you get something fresh out of the earth and you're like, that's a plant, it's also food. And I think we're pretty far from recognizing that. Things like recognizing what a cashew looks like on a plant. It's weird. Or peanuts. Peanuts look weird on plants, right? So getting a more contextual understanding of where food comes from, how it's farmed, like how it gets to us, how far away it must be grown because it's a tropical plant. What is closer to us that is more sustainably harvested and delivered, right? And when it comes to your door, outside of all those concerns, because that's not really covered in this book, but it's in my head. When it comes to your door, how do you appreciate it? How do you make it be like the radishest of radishes? Like, how do you appreciate the thing for what it is rather than try to put a bunch of sugar on it or put a bunch of salt on it or fry it in oil? Because that's not really honoring the food as it is, right? Again, circling back to Robin Wall Kimmerer's book, she talks about the harvesting the wood for the baskets. She also talks about sweetgrass, obviously, it's in the title, and the relationship that certain practitioners will have with the plant. So if they prune it, it comes back bigger. If they pay attention to it, she realized. The research would say if you're pruning it, you're going to reduce your stock. But really, paying attention to the plant creates a relationship where it produces more. So like being curious about that. That was the full circle. But getting back to the last book, I wanted it to be more of a recipe book when I got it back in 2009, 2010, whenever it came out, because I was all about food. I was all about cooking. I was going to like run a little supper club. And I reread it recently. I reread it in the past couple months. Decided I would keep the book because it's got lessons about honoring food and reducing food waste, like having a cycle of if you make something all together here, it can go into this and then it can go into this. And like, think about those things. Be creative. Food is a way to be creative and honor both the earth that provides the food as well as the experience of cooking and feeding people you love, and like celebrate it. Make it magic. Make it magic. It can also go in the magic category. Yeah. So unlikely, but bringing up the rear here, everlasting meal. 16 books. That's going to be a lot to carry. But, you know, I think I can do it. Let's definitely talk about that. All right. Hi, Adrian. Welcome. We're just at the end here. Hi, Jocelyn. Hello. Maggie says, lamb's quarter is also called prairie spinach. Steamed is very good with salt and a splash of balsamic vinegar. Ooh. Lamb's quarters. I can't remember if that's the really soft one or if it's like the very mild one. There's a lettuce that makes a specific salad in France that I can get sometimes here. And I feel like it's called lamb's lettuce in English, but I can't remember. It's very good. I don't steam it because I never get enough to like reduce it because steaming always reduces. So I always use it as a salad. But yeah. Oh, vinegar. How are we going to get vinegar? How are we going to get oil? Cultivate those olive trees and cure them. And then vinegar. Vinegar is like wine. So we need grapes at some point. So we may need to establish a regional economy, but it's doable. It's doable. Or fruit vinegar. You don't need grapes for that. Okay, let's talk about vinegar because that's pretty key. I need a bike cart for my books. Yeah. What would I be walking with? I have a bike. I've got like rolling suitcases. I don't know. I'd have to consider that plan, but that's very immediate. That's not like have the go bag ready. So that will be the next video. Okay. So I'm 15 minutes over. This has been a blast. Thank you guys for joining and contributing. Maggie had some great tips / recommendations. If you've got recommendations for your books for the apocalypse, especially regional specific ones for edible plants, drop it in the comments and where it's appropriate too, because I think that'd be useful. But otherwise, yes, thank you for coming. Thank you for watching. I'll be on again on Friday at 7 a.m. I'm setting the clock back another hour because I find myself puttering around waiting to do morning pages, and it's supposed to be first thing. So join me Friday early morning for morning pages, and it'll be hopping around, but once a week, a little half an hour morning pages, 3 pages, and then half an hour chat. So stay tuned for that. And otherwise, have a lovely rest of the day, spending your time being magical and joyous, and hopefully going about your life with a little more hope. That's my wish for you today. So thanks again, and I'll talk to you guys soon.